up until this point, if you've been following this show since the beginning, we've interviewed some really impressive educators out there in the world today and talked about everything from challenges to how they're dealing with the state of education currently in a world of COVID and remote learning, as well as getting to know the things that they really love about what they do. And today, I want to talk a little bit more about that in terms of why it is so powerful that they love what they do and why they love what they do. And it's not just because they're teaching. It's how they're teaching and how they're getting across the points that are important for their students to learn, but at the same point in time, how it creates an experience in experiential learning. And I'm going to dive back into some theory. I am not a certified licensed educator, but after having conversations over many years of dealing with educators, from the time my mom would take me to trade shows and take me to set up early childhood centers and take me to set up classrooms, and I'd get to meet the teachers and I'd get to meet the other students, because I was very fortunate growing up to have grown up in the world of education, not with having my parents be teachers at that moment in time, because prior to that time, prior to me being born, both my parents taught. My dad taught music. My mom was an early childhood educator and was certified to train all the way up through into high school. And my dad taught music. But from an early age, what that means for me is that I was able to observe and learn the way I think my parents knew I would understand things best. And not only that, but actually understand what would be interesting to me so that I would dive deeper. And this whole concept, I have to believe, and if I'm wrong, please, somebody correct me out there, but I have to believe that this stuff is at least talked about in terms of a way to engage your students. You know, I've read the book. All right. This book is called The Process of Education. And if you haven't read this book, that's totally makes sense. Super old book. It's from 1961 by Jerome Bruner. And this whole premise from his standpoint was that the world of education and teaching should not be stuck in a classroom where you're regurgitating facts and figures. And this is back in the 60s, okay, when this whole thing came out. He talks about these systems of processing understanding, because he went to a conference and talked to all of these educators, all of these scientists, all of these psychologists, all of these people who were experts in their fields and were trying to figure out the best way that students and kids learn. And the idea of this theory, this discovery learning, and this idea that if you put people in a place where they have a chance to inquire and discover and dig deeper and ask questions, they will actually take control of their education and actually build a higher understanding of the concepts you're trying to get through to them, because they're literally having to learn the way that the initial people who discovered this stuff had to learn in some shape and form, right? Obviously, it's also in a controlled setting. So I guess my question and like the reason why we do what we do at BPODs is because there's these two stories. There's the story of Brad in class in I don't even remember, but like first or second grade, sitting there reading from a biology textbook and going, cool, I'm learning science because I'm reading and I'm understanding basic stuff. And at that age, you don't really understand what's going on. I know in third grade, we talked about simple machines like screws, levers, all that stuff. But the That's not what I remember. What I remember is when we actually had to dive in and figure out a way to insulate an ice cube, and the longest person won. And then we dissected and understood why different materials actually help to hold that together. Like this is the point of discovery learning when we start thinking about it, is that when you're diving in and you're educating students and you're putting them in a situation where they have to work backwards from like what they're observing to understand the theories, and they have to pull it apart, and they're pulling it apart by asking questions and trying to not only do that like in their head, especially when they're younger with limited vocabulary, to ask a better question. They're increasing their vocabulary. They're working on all of these details, and they're beginning to find ways to piece all of these different bits of information together to understand a larger theory. Okay? So back to Bruner, right? The idea of this is that we knew we needed better systems to teach and educate. And we knew we needed these systems because socioeconomic statuses in the household were changing. And prior to this, there were a lot of people still being taught on the farms, one-room schoolhouses, learning on the farm, working all this stuff. And that has shifted, right? I think right now we're seeing a bit of a shift back, because this episode, just for awareness, if you're listening to this years later, this episode is February 2021 is when we're recording this. And right now there's this weird idea of like, what is education going to be? Teachers are at home teaching their students via, technologies, and those students are at home and they have either a parent, a grandparent, a babysitter, somebody supervising them, and they're trying to keep them engaged through this digital interface, which these kids have grown up with and are smarter than most of the teachers in terms of navigating how to use these things. And this whole premise right now, I think, to like really look at how education works, to try some new things, is happening, right? This whole idea of cohort learning, where students are coming to school every single day, but they're coming to school, 2 to 3 times a week in a smaller group of students, so that teacher can have better one-on-one time with those students and maybe do some exploratory or really active, engaging activities, because the rest of it literally is lecture and presentation and question and answer through a screen, when the teacher could potentially be an hour away from that student. So the cool thing is we have the technology that this works. The sad thing is that much of the learning that's happening is just through a screen and worksheets and on a computer. And I guess my challenge would be, are those students actually learning? And some of them are, right? Like I want to be very clear about this. The situation that we're in, everybody is doing the best that they can, and there are limited resources in order to execute this. But I would challenge the fact that students are learning as much or understanding the concepts as much as those educators or teachers are hoping they understand, for a whole plethora of reasons, right? Attention span, food, a whole bunch of stuff. But I want to go back, because this idea of Bruner, right? Like dissecting, talking, figuring out this stuff, and trying to refer to these systems of great, where we're increasing in our ability to teach techniques. We've got technologies that aid in growing these human beings, and that we can find better ways to manage learning and help those students who aren't understanding to learn better through leveraging technologies. And we can help those students who are accelerating to accelerate even faster by leveraging different techniques of learning. And that was his whole premise, right? Like this whole idea of building out a process of education came down to a set of views, and these views that grew out of this 10-day conference was based around 4 areas: the role of structure in learning, the readiness for learning, the nature of intuition, and the desire to learn and how it may be stimulated. That whole idea, this book, The Process of Education, is all written around these 4 themes, okay? And these 4 themes really bring to light in today's world where we've iterated on it to come up with inquiry-based learning and problem-based learning, okay? And these concepts of inquiry-based and problem-based, as successful as they are, I know there are a bunch of you out there who are like, I want to use it, but we got to use this textbook that's been approved by our board, and our board is mandating that we use this stuff because it teaches the facts and the figures and the symbology and all this other stuff. But I would challenge it, right? Like, you as an educator have the ability to tweak some of that stuff in order to get across the information and the lessons that you're trying to teach, okay? This whole discovery learning method in a classroom, however you want to classify it, right? Inquiry-based, problem-based, they all have slight variations. In fact, many people think that problem-based is just a subsegment of inquiry-based, and inquiry-based is just a subsegment of this discovery learning. So if we look at it as, hey, they all kind of fit within the same realm, it's just a matter of how you tweak maybe some of the construction or structure of the lessons or the units or the modules, that type of stuff. It's still going to be effective. And the thing is when we start talking and debating whether or not, this doesn't fall into that, and that doesn't fall into this, and this doesn't fall into this. Now we're not focused on the end goal, which is to make sure that these students best understand the concepts that we know they should learn. And not only just understand, but be able to apply them to the real world or to their future, right? So rather than diving into the fact, right, like there's a white paper out there of problem-based learning and inquiry-based learning, and both are student-centered teaching pedagogies, and each of these encourage active learning and critical thinking, but here's why they're different, and here's why they're separate, but here's why they're apart. Like, does that actually help the student, or does it just help us categorize things? Because we as humans need to categorize things because it makes us feel better and safer about the things we're doing. That's a topic for another day, but I just want to throw it out there because I think that's important. Because rather than getting stuck on that, I want to go through and I want to walk you through how you can take basic lessons and basic structure in this idea of inquiry-based learning or discovery learning, or take those concepts of what that means and apply it to that old textbook or those old methodologies or that standards that those teachers are asking you, or not the teachers, excuse me, that board of your education board or your whatever your governing body is that controls the curriculum in your school or district, right? I want to walk through how you can understand simple ways to tweak it so that you can make it work better, especially right now because the students are at home and they're testing things and everybody's kind of confused. So I hope that these little nuggets will be helpful, and I want you to understand that this is how we at BPODs work with educators to try and implement beekeeping systems as a form of engagement and entertainment so that the students stay engaged, ask questions, get comfortable, take chances, begin to explore, begin to ask questions, begin to apply, begin to dig into real world results, begin to do all of this stuff. And you see this acceleration of learning when students own their education and all you act as is a facilitator of that knowledge and information and guide them to apply it, okay? So taking a step back, all right? We're going to dive into some nuggets right here. So get a pen, paper. If you haven't heard this before, I feel I want to hear from you, and I want to hear why you think you haven't heard about this before. If you have heard about this before, and you've gone through the evolution of implementing systems like this in your classroom or in your school or in your district, I also want to hear from you because I think that it's so important. That's why we had so many educators on initially, because I wanted to share with you that there are people who are finding ways to implement cool, teaching methodologies that engage students. And not only does it engage the students, but it makes it way more fun to do your job. And it makes it way more impactful for you as an educator, because you begin to see learning. You see it happen in their brain. All right, before I dive in, the things that I have witnessed when we install a system, kids are 30 yards back initially, and then by the end of it, the bees are being installed and everybody's around the bee pod and they're excited and they're asking questions, whereas initially they were silent, they were quiet, they were watching and observing, but they were scared. They're like, I don't want to touch it. I don't know why we have these. I don't think this is important. Can I go back inside and read my book? It seems safer. It seems comfortable. And then that same student is up there pulling out a bar without a veil, looking at the bees, pointing out, hey, that's a worker bee, that's a drone, there's larva, there's eggs, hey, there's the queen, right? That's propolis, that's wax, that's honey, that's brood. Like, they begin to identify, and then they go, hey, why is this so different? Like, why is the ratio of honey more on this bar than it is on this other bar? And they begin to ask questions, and those questions lead into concepts that can be applied to other things. Science, technology, engineering, math, even art and history and social studies. It's super cool. All right. As you can see, I hope you realize, I'm super passionate about this stuff. This is why we do this, because I think it's important that educators have access to this information, because at the end of the day, I know why you decided to get into teaching. And I know that some days it's really hard to do it, because sometimes you just can't get through to the students with the resources or the methodologies that you're using. And it gets really frustrating. I've been there. Again, not every day, right? But we teach a lot. And sometimes there are just those days. But then there are those days that counteract it, where it's just super fulfilling because you see the learning happening. All right. So with that, I want to use an example here. Okay. And I'm going to tell you, this is an example that, I've seen used before, and I've seen it executed really well with a little bit of planning. And I've seen it executed extremely poorly because a teacher or an educator just dives into it. The thing about inquiry-based learning, discovery-based learning, is the prep time. You might need to take an extra 5 to 15 minutes to prep for this stuff, which is one of the things that we at BPOS are trying to make sure you don't have to always do, by making sure the tools and resources are there and being there as a support mechanism for you throughout as many years as you want us to be. Okay. But anyway, diving in. All right. So in this idea of inquiry-based learning and these constructivist theories of development, which emphasize a need for students to create their own version of reality in their mind rather than just regurgitating, which is a lot of what I know I grew up with. And it's a lot of what I know students and I know forward-thinking educators. If you're listening to this, I know you're thinking about all the different ways you could teach tomorrow's lesson. I know that. And sometimes it stinks because you don't have the time or the resources to make it happen. So I'm going to use this example. I want you to help to understand the fact that this is how you can take simple concepts just by flipping how you think about them and maybe ask a question or present them. And it still will take the same amount of time as your regular prep. Okay. But these are just small little tweaks that help to move the needle a little bit. Okay. So, often when we think about quote unquote labeling activities, even we have worksheets, right? What are the parts of a bee? Okay. Or we do a lot of gardening and talking about plants out in nature. So, hey, if you need to label the parts of a leaf that you've been given on this diagram, right? Here's a diagram. Go label the parts of a leaf. And based on the information provided in the textbook, provide a brief explanation of the function of each part you have labeled. Now, in my mind, that is like old school worksheet 101. Guess what? You're going to get the right answers if the student looks in the book, because they're just going to copy it directly from the book. You'll get some students who are going to try and reword it so it's not directly from the book. But I would imagine most of you get the feedback and they're regurgitating exactly what is in the book or what is in the resource material. If you take it a step further and you've said, hey, I'm not giving you a book, use the internet, go find this stuff. Hey, you're leveraging a tool and it's a little closer to a discovery learning or inquiry-based learning activity. But what I want you to listen to is I literally said, label the parts of the leaf diagram you have been given based on the information provided in your textbook. Provide a brief explanation of the function of each part you have labeled. That's the assignment. What if we were to reword this a little bit? Instead of saying that, how about we say something along the lines of, go outside and collect 4 different leaves. Examine them. Look at them closely. Write some notes down on each of them. Now, in your own words, in what ways are they similar and in what ways are they different? What purpose do you think each part of the leaf is serving? And which of those parts is common across all of them? And which of them have very specific things that is extremely different than the other 3? Now think about that. Think about the power of what that does to the brain. The brain can no longer take the easy way out and go back to that textbook and literally regurgitate word for word what the textbook says. Now, that textbook should serve as a point of reference once you take this a step further and have discussion. And if you're using Zoom right now, you can do quiet rooms, or you can do it in your cohorts if you're doing small cohorts, or you can have them potentially do some group stuff. If you're using Zoom, you can put them into rooms if you've got older students and have them discuss things and then pull them back. A whole bunch of ways you can leverage the technology. And if you have questions on that, feel free to ping us. I can help you with some of that. But what the point is that you're going to get the students having to understand what they've already learned. Maybe there's something in their mind where, hey, I learned this before, this is what this is called. And then you've got a student who says it's something else. And now you have a discussion about which one is right, which one is wrong. Guess what? Maybe neither of them are wrong. Maybe neither of them are completely right. But what it does is it opens up the idea of exploring these things further so that the students actually take the time to process the information and run it through their brain and all the different parts that create learning in the brain. Like it becomes a very cool exercise. So I'll give you another example that we've used, say, with bees. Okay, as you know, bees die. Of course, everybody. So what we will say is we'll say, hey, there's some dead bees here on the ground. Let's collect them. Be careful, right? Put on some gloves. Collect them in a jar. Let's take them inside. Let's separate them out based on size and based on features. Let's look at them all. And then we do the same thing. And they're all in groups. And we go, hey, examine all these bees. What's similar? What's different? What are the parts of the bee? Right? And they've gone through this based on the experience of living and working in that hive, that they're deeply interested in the bees. Because they're going, okay, I know the head, thorax, abdomen, I know the stinger, I know the wings. Hey, why does this one bee that's a little bigger than the rest have giant eyes on the top of its head? Well, now they're getting up and close with a drone bee. And now you can begin to talk about drone bees and why they've got these giant eyes on their head, whereas the worker bees don't have nearly as large of eyes. You begin to have these discussions and the purpose that those things serve to each of them. And what you can do is, as they're going through this inquiry, you begin to list them out and you begin to have discussions, you begin to explore, and all of a sudden you get students who are interested in diving deeper into pieces or aspects, or you get the students who then go, great, I went through the exercise, why is this important? And then you go, look, we've got a problem in the world with bees and bee population, and drones are extremely important because all they do in the hive is they serve reproduction. And so those eyes are out there because they have to visually identify a queen flying in the air to go mate with her. That's what those eyes serve, right? So there's cool things you can do. The nice thing about problem-based or inquiry-based learning is you can take lessons like that and take an extra 5 to 10 minutes when you've got some clarity and go through, hey, what if I reword this just a little bit? And maybe it stretches the lesson by maybe 5 to 10 minutes. And at the end of the day, maybe you're skipping out on something else. But if they're learning and they're actually understanding it, isn't that more important than maybe trying to just get through everything? Now, there are going to be days where you have to get through things. But the cool thing that I've seen and have witnessed with some of our teachers who begin to implement this using bee pods or other things, right? Like this is something you can apply to almost anything. You can apply it to history, math, science, art, right? You can apply it to a whole bunch of stuff. But what they do is they begin to build this culture in the classroom. And in the culture in the classroom, throughout that year, those teachers begin to identify those students who begin to ask questions. And students don't fall behind because now they're engaged and they want to learn and they don't get as frustrated. And peers begin to help because now the peers are learning it in an inquiry-based way and they're having to explain it back to them. And now all you're doing is guiding and facilitating that learning of a team rather than a room filled with young people who are just looking at you for 8 hours a day. I mean, it's extremely, extremely interesting to me to see this applied, right? There are teachers we work with who are applying this to like business in high school. There are teachers who are applying this to math in middle school. There are teachers applying this to kindergarten students. They're applying it to kindergarten students to talk through basic problem-solving skills in the classroom, to teach sharing, to teach communication, to teach, hey, basic responsibility. And then later on, once they've learned responsibility in later years, accountability. Two different things. But the cool part of this whole thing, again, is the fulfillment that you see in the students when they begin to engage and actively choose to learn for themselves, not have it be thrust upon them. Because your job then becomes 10 times easier. Your job becomes 10 times more enjoyable. You have way more good days than bad days. You're always going to have bad days. You're dealing with students of all ages who come with a whole bunch of stuff to school, and you guys are asked to do a ton of work, not only like as teacher, but like coach, listener, like a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm hoping we get a couple guests on who are going to help us with some of that stuff. But I wanted to leave you with this little last nugget. Take a chance on this one. That next lesson, think about a way via Zoom. Just, you're doing the teaching via Zoom, or maybe you've got a cohort. If you are, you're probably one of the lucky people right now. If you've got a full classroom back, great. This is stuff you should be implementing like now. Take a chance on it. Give it a shot. If it doesn't work, don't give up on it. Hit me up. We'll figure it out. More than happy to work through it with you. Even more than happy to help you wordsmith things and even build out a basic worksheet if you need help with that. I'm more than happy to do that, right? I want to see kids come out of school with the ability to grow as adults. And this is step one in helping them become responsible, accountable adults when they leave high school and choose to do whatever the world has in front of them. And so I want to see more and more teachers adopt this type of methodology as a way to teach and a way to impact students, engage their learning styles and how they want to learn, because this will allow you to better coach them later on. That's it. All right. With that, thank you for listening. If this was great, and helpful for you, please take a screenshot on your phone, share it with friends, tag us in it. If you have questions, comments, give us a rating, put comments on the episode. 5 stars is great. If you didn't like it and you didn't think it was worth 5 stars, put 1 star on it. That's totally fine. But if you put 1 star, I want to know why you put 1 star so we can improve on it, right? We're still early at this. We're still trying to learn how to put this information in front of you. But I appreciate you. I appreciate you for what you're doing. And I look forward to talking with many of you over the next many, many years, because I hope we can begin to build momentum in this realm. So with that, be well, and we'll talk to you next week. Take care.